You're not going to believe this, but there's a woman who says she heard a wall breathing. This isn't folklore. It's not a hallucination. Denise Parker returned to an old school on the south side of Chicago, the same place where her little sister, Maya, once went to elementary school. Maya vanished one summer day in 1994. No one saw her leave the school. No one heard a scream, and her body was never found, nearly 30 years later. Denise walked back into the very room where Maya used to sit, and in there, room 6, she heard a sound one she would never forget. A sound like someone trying to breathe from inside the wall, and when she leaned in closer, she saw something sticking out from a crack in the plaster, a piece of old fabric, a bracelet, and on it was her sister's name, Maya. Fairview is a small neighborhood on the southern edge of Chicago where the streets are named after black generals. But no city planner ever seemed to remember it on their maps. By the early 90s, the homes there had started to decay not from the weather, but from the silence that came from City Hall. Roosevelt Elementary sat tucked between 2 abandoned blocks and an old school bus lot. It used to echo with laughter after class now. It only echoes in memory. The Parker family lived on the corner of 83rd and Marquette. Their mother, Charlene, worked night shifts as a nurse at the local clinic. Their father, Leonard, drove the city's Route 57 bus and always wore sunglasses, 7 when it rained. They weren't rich, but their house was warm and full of rules. Nobody goes out after 7 p.m., no lying about test scores, and never, ever leave family behind. Those 3 rules were the only safety net between their children and the dangers waiting outside. Maya was the youngest. She had big round eyes that blinked fast when she was nervous, and a strange little habit: she wrote down every dream she could remember in a tiny notebook. Denise still has that notebook. One page reads, "I dreamed I was at school, but no one could see me. Not even the teacher. I yelled really loud, but everyone just laughed and walked past." Denise used to tease Maya and call her the little scientist, because she was always asking weird questions like, "If no one can see you, do you still exist?" Or, "How do we know people aren't just machines pretending to be real?" Maya loved books, especially mysteries and sci-fi, and once wrote a letter to NASA at age 8 asking, "Have you ever found someone who's invisible?" But no one thought those questions were anything more than childhood curiosity, not even Denise. Every morning, Maya tied her shoelaces twice, just to check, and always used her left hand to open the school gate, even though she was right-handed. When Denise once asked why, Maya said, "So, if I ever disappear, you'll know which way I went." Denise laughed at the time, but now, those words have become a quiet knife, twisting in her mind. That day, June 16th, 1994, was the last day of school. Denise, a junior in high school, was prepping for the SATs, so she didn't walk Maya to school like usual. Their mom had an early shift. Their dad wasn't home yet. Maya walked on her own, just 3 blocks. Red backpack, white sneakers, blue and white striped shirt. Denise remembers every detail, because that was the last time she saw her little sister. By noon, Maya hadn't come home. Denise remembers waiting and waiting, standing on the porch, eyes fixed on the corner where Maya usually appeared. But that day, no one came from that direction. 30 minutes passed. Denise ran to the school. She remembers the empty hallway, the 3B classroom locked, and the front office already shutting down for summer break, when she asked the secretary. The reply was, "Didn't Maya already leave?" No one knew when she left. No one saw her exit, and she was never seen again. What's strange is, when Maya's mom went to the police to report her missing, they didn't even file the report right away. They said Maya was probably at a friend's house or ran away because of bad grades. No one in the family believed that, but there was nothing they could do. Because Maya was a young black girl from a poor neighborhood where missing children were never a priority, Denise will never forget what the officer on duty said that day: "She'll probably come back tomorrow." Kids like that pull stunts all the time, but Maya never came back. And the only thing left was a photo taken the day before she vanished. In the photo, Maya is wearing a solid blue shirt, not the striped one she wore that morning. Denise remembers clearly. She ironed that striped shirt herself. So why is the shirt in the photo different That tiny detail, something no one else noticed, would later become the key that pushed Denise to reopen everything and start her own investigation. June 16th, 1994. The temperature in Chicago soared to nearly 91 degrees. It was one of the first sweltering days after the spring rains and the last day of school. Roosevelt Elementary held an early dismissal. Wrapping up by noon, kids rushed out with wrinkled report cards in hand, ready to begin summer break. But Maya wasn't among them. Denise remembers waiting on the front porch until almost 12:30, scanning the sidewalk for her sister. At first, she thought maybe Maya stopped for ice cream or visited a friend, but by 1 p.m., something in her gut told her something was wrong, without waiting for her mom to get home. Denise ran to the school. Roosevelt was already shutting down for summer. Staff were packing up, desks pushed into storage rooms, and the front gate was locked. Denise banged on the back door, an old side entrance she remembered from years ago. A janitor appeared, surprised to see her. When Denise asked about Maya, the woman just shook her head. Didn't see anyone stick around. She probably went home, but Denise didn't give up. She circled the building, tried to peek through the windows of classroom 3B, but the curtains were drawn. She walked home with a sinking feeling in her chest. That evening, when their mother Charlene went to the police to report Maya missing, the officer on duty, a middle-aged white man with sunglasses perched on his head, despite the late hour, asked a few half-hearted questions before saying, "Probably just ran away." Kids do that in summer, when Charlene pushed back, saying Maya had never gone anywhere on her own. He shrugged. It wasn't until 48 hours later that an official missing person report was filed, an unforgivable delay for a child disappearance, one the Parker family never forgot. Once the file was opened, investigators began reaching out to anyone who might be seen Maya last. A classmate remembered Maya said she wanted to stop by the library before going home. But when they questioned the librarian, Mrs. Jeffries, she insisted Maya never came by that day. "I'd remember. She always borrowed mystery books. But I didn't see her at all." Two accounts, completely at odds. One said Maya went to the library. The other said she didn't, but there were no cameras to confirm anything. Roosevelt Elementary didn't have full surveillance back then. Just one camera at the front entrance, and according to the school's records, the footage from that day had already been erased by the automatic backup system. A week later, police labeled Maya's case an unexplained disappearance. They asked classmates, neighbors, teachers. No one knew anything. No struggle, no scream, no trail to follow. And just like that, Maya seemed to vanish in the middle of a summer afternoon, leaving nothing behind but an empty seat at the Parker family dinner table. But the Parkers refused to give up. From the moment Maya went missing, Charlene started knocking on doors all over the neighborhood, asking anyone if they'd seen her daughter. One person said they saw Maya walking past the corner store that morning, the one that sold her favorite cola popsicles. Someone else suggested she might be hiding in a friend's basement, but no one knew for sure. Denise remembers how the whole neighborhood felt in that first week, as if everyone was trying to forget something, or afraid to admit that a child could vanish in broad daylight, in a place they thought was safe. Each day, hope grew thinner. Flyers with Maya's picture were taped to streetlights, bus stops, laundromat windows. A few in the community formed search groups, combing parks, abandoned buildings, the lakefront by the industrial zone. But the police had already shifted their focus. 2 weeks in, the case was handed to a lower priority unit, and Denise heard through someone she trusted that Maya's file had been classified under non-critical disappearances. She remembers screaming at the officer, "Non-critical." My sister's 8 years old. But there was one detail Denise couldn't shake during the searches. They stopped by Roosevelt by then. The school was mostly shut down, but Maya's classroom 3B had been sealed off with a sign reading, "Do not enter under maintenance." Denise remembered because she'd asked to go in and see Maya's desk, her things. The facilities manager refused, said the room had a leaky ceiling and wasn't safe, but as she turned to leave, Denise saw through the dust-covered glass of the classroom door someone inside, a tall figure in a white shirt, back turned to her, writing something on the blackboard. She called out, but the person didn't respond. She called again, this time. The figure turned, only there was no face. Just a dark blur, or maybe it was the way the light hit the glass. but it was enough to send Denise stumbling backward. To this day, she still wonders if it was real or just stress playing tricks on her. 2 months later, Denise returned to Roosevelt, this time with a friend who had a background in construction. The school was locked tighter now. Part of the hallway had been torn down. Her friend noticed something strange. A new brick wall had been added between classrooms 3B and 3A. But according to the school's original blueprints, those two rooms had only been separated by a thin partition. Not brick. That raised questions. Why build a new wall in an empty classroom? Who authorized it? And for what reason? No one gave her answers. And over time, the questions only grew darker. Then in 1997, 3 years after Maya disappeared, something happened. Roosevelt Elementary was officially shut down due to structural disrepair and handed over to the city for conversion into a vocational center during the teardown. Workers found something strange inside that newly built wall, the same one Denise had seen years earlier. At first, they thought it was just a forgotten teacher supply bag, but when they pulled it out, they found a red school backpack, faded and dusty, but fully zipped. Inside was a notebook with galaxy drawings, a pencil labeled Maya P., and an old mystery novel by Walter Dean Myers. Every item matched what Denise had described in her original report. The police were called, but their response was not what the Parkers had hoped for. Instead of reopening the investigation, they filed a supplemental report stating the backpack may have been left behind by a student before the wall was constructed. Denise couldn't believe it. Maya never came home late. She packed her bag every night by the school schedule. That backpack being hidden behind a wall that shouldn't have existed couldn't possibly be an accident. More disturbing still, the wall had been built in the summer of 1994, right after Maya disappeared. Denise tried to track down the workers who had done the renovation, but the records for that year's construction were missing. No permits, no blueprint changes, no explanation for why a new wall had been built in classroom 3B. Which led Denise to ask the one question nobody wanted to answer. If the backpack was hidden in that wall, who put it there, and why? One of the demolition crew members, no retired, agreed to meet with Denise weeks later. He said that while tearing down the wall. They also found a small scrap of paper wedged between the bricks. It was then included in the official police log. The note had just one sentence, written in blue ink. She wasn't ready yet. He didn't know what it meant. Management had told them to turn in all found items, so he assumed it had been logged. But Denise never saw that note in any police file from that moment on. She knew Maya's disappearance wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a case of a lost child. It was something hidden, on purpose, timed, and someone had worked hard to make sure every trace quietly disappeared. In 2018, Denise decided to reopen the investigation on her own terms. She no longer trusted the police or the system. Instead, she started reaching out to people who had gone to school with Maya. By now, they were all adults. Some had left Chicago. Others still lived scattered around the South Side. As Denise listened to their stories, she began to notice a disturbing pattern in their memories. All of them recalled a strange game they once played in Maya's class, led by none other than the gym teacher, Mr. Marcus Trent. They called it the Silence Challenge. Every Wednesday afternoon, a group of students would be selected to take part. They were blindfolded, told to remain completely silent in the dark, seated in a circle, and not to react no matter what they heard. Trent said it was to develop self-control and sensory awareness. But one former student, Jerome, remembered it differently. Sometimes, while we were blindfolded, we'd hear the door open and then someone breathing real heavy, right by your ear. One kid started crying once, but Mr. Trent said it was just part of the mental exercise. Looking back, I'm not sure it was just us in that room. Denise asked, "Do any of you remember Maya ever doing this game?" A woman named Kia nodded. Maya was good at it. She'd always last the longest without making a sound. One time, Mr. Trent even said she had potential, but after the last time she played, she never came back to school. That detail had never appeared in any official file. Denise dug into old teacher records at the district's personnel office. Marcus Trent's name had disappeared from the staff roster by 1996, just 2 years after Maya went missing. His departure was marked as voluntary resignation due to personal reasons. No forwarding address, no record of where he went next in the older archives. Denise found a memo signed documenting a partnership between Roosevelt Elementary and a program labeled OBSR program. She had never heard of it. No one currently at the school remembered it. No one admitted it had ever existed. A week later, Denise tracked down Roosevelt's retired vice principal, Lorena Boyd, after some hesitation. Boyd said something that shook Denise to the core. We weren't allowed to say no to OBSR. It came from above some kind of behavioral pilot program. When Denise asked if parents had been informed, Boyd shook her head. No, they just called it enhanced physical learning. The truth was beginning to take shape, not a random disappearance, but a child who vanished inside a controlled environment, under supervision, maybe even selected in advance. After that meeting, Denise couldn't sleep for days. She had always feared Maya was kidnapped, or worse, killed. But the idea that her sister may have been part of a behavioral experiment disguised as education chilled her in an entirely new way. She began searching for any mention of the OBSR program across public records, news archives, government sites. But there was nothing. No descriptions, no websites, no budget trails. The more she searched, the quieter it got. So she changed tactics. She contacted an old friend, Malek, who had once worked for the Illinois State Board of Education, now retired. Malek froze when Denise mentioned OBSR. After a long pause, he asked, "Where'd you hear that name?" Once she told him everything, he whispered, "You really shouldn't dig any deeper." But seeing the fire in her eyes, he agreed to help. They met at the State Archive facility, in a dim, dusty room filled with old files. There, they found a box with no clear index. Inside, a photocopy marked Proposal OBSR Piece 1, 1993. Beneath the heading, Observation and Behavioral Stimulus. Response Applied Protocol for Controlled Environments in Primary Education. Denise could barely believe what she was reading. OBSR wasn't just a random name. It was an acronym for a Covert Behavior Response Pilot Program, quietly implemented in select inner-city schools, specifically those with high minority enrollment and economic instability. The appendix listed 7 schools. Roosevelt was number 3. Approval was signed off with initials EMR, a designation Malik didn't recognize. Could be Education Management Research, he guessed, but I've never seen a real agency by that name. The document outlined the techniques used: silence challenges, psychological response to light deprivation, observation in confined spaces, and evaluation of adaptive behavior under loss of personal control. Denise's body went cold at the end of the appendix. The in-school trial supervisor was listed simply as MT Marcus Trent. None of it was coincidence. The game, the pilot school, the delayed missing person report, the backpack behind the wallet, all connected. And Denise began to understand Maya Sharp. Imaginative Maya had unknowingly become the ideal candidate in their eyes. She turned to Malik, voice trembling. If this is real, how many other kids were being watched? Malik didn't answer. He just closed his eyes and whispered, "Some things never make it into the final reports." The night watchman's name was Curtis Morrow. In 1994, he worked the evening shift at Roosevelt routine patrols from 6 p.m. to midnight. No meetings, no staff input. Just a man everyone knew as the old guy who dozed off at the desk. But one June night, Curtis saw something he'd never forget and had never spoken about. Denise found Curtis through a former staff member. When she brought up Maya, he froze, eyes drifting, like pulling a memory from a locked drawer. After a long silence, he began to speak, his voice low, like he was talking to himself. That night, I'd just finished my rounds. It was around 10. I was reading the paper in the security office when the lights in the West Wing started flickering, then cut out completely. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. I figured it was just the circuit again. But when I got close to room 3B, I heard footsteps inside. That room was supposed to be empty. I knocked. No response. Tried the handle. It wasn't locked. Inside was pitch black. The air smelled metallic, like fresh plaster and dust. I swept the light around. Nobody there. But on the chalkboard, someone had just written something. If she stays silent long enough, she'll start to see. He paused. I didn't know what it meant. I went to erase it, then heard a noise behind me. Turned around. Nothing. But when I aimed the light at the left wall, I saw a crack. Fresh patchwork. Cement still wet. That wall hadn't been touched the night before. I leaned in and heard breathing. Faint. Like someone holding their breath. Listening to me. I backed out. Shut the door and never went in there again. Curtis never filed a report. He was afraid. And honestly, he didn't think anyone would believe a night guard who said he heard a wall breathe. But after that night, he avoided the West Wing, and he never forgot this a few times that summer. He saw a dim light inside room 3B when there were no repairs scheduled. Each time, he watched a man in a white shirt leave the building around midnight. He never saw his face clearly. When Denise asked, "Do you think it was Marcus Trent Curtis?" just sighed. I don't know, but whoever it was, he knew he was being watched. And something about the way he walked, like he really believed he was doing the right thing. Denise left Curtis home with a new feeling. Not just grief, but terror, the kind that comes when you realize education can be used to hide the unthinkable. And Maya, a little girl with a big imagination, might have seen too much, understood too soon, and because of that, she was chosen. His name was Marcus Trent, the man kids at Roosevelt Elementary used to call Coach T, tall, muscular, always wore gray athletic gear and spotless white sneakers. For most students, he was the one who first taught them how to run laps, breathe deep, and stay focused during a basketball game. But to Denise, he was always off, too perfect, too orderly, and always smiling at the wrong moments when everyone else looked worried. And now, as all the threads began closing in around him, that smile was the thing that haunted her most. As Denise dug deeper, she discovered that Trent hadn't just resigned after Maya's disappearance. A 1996 internal bulletin from the Chicago Board of Education mentioned that Mr. Marcus T. has been transferred to a strategic behavioral research unit under the state education office. That's not how people talk about a teacher quitting. That's how someone gets moved into the shadows. There were no details, no address, no department head, no public budget trail. It was as if Trent had been quietly relocated to continue something no one was allowed to talk about. Denise contacted every old classmate she could find. One, a man named Darnell, now living in Houston, hesitated, then finally shared something he'd never told anyone. I remember Coach T once said, "There's a game where if you stay quiet long enough, you'll learn to see through walls." Maya asked, "Why would you need to see through walls?" And he just smiled. But it wasn't a regular smile. "It was off," Denise asked. And after that, Darnell paused, then whispered, "After that." I started having dreams. Dreams where the classroom walls were breathing. Each memory was another puzzle piece, clicking into place. Denise remembered what Curtis, the night watchman, had said the message on the chalkboard, "If she stays silent long enough, she'll start to see." Now Darnell was echoing the same words. Was this an experiment, a suggestion, a psychological manipulation? She reached out to a behavioral psychologist who had once worked with military programs, Dr. Howard McLean. When Denise told him everything, he didn't seem surprised. "I've read documents from that era. Some experimental studies aimed to test unconscious behavioral responses in students. The goal was to measure absolute compliance in controlled environments. If Trent was part of that, he wasn't acting alone?" Denise asked. "What were they trying to find out?" McLean replied, "Where the line is between a child who obeys and one who never surrenders. And maybe Maya, with those wide, curious eyes and vivid imagination, had been one of the ones who wouldn't surrender." In November 2022, Denise and an independent film crew returned to Roosevelt, now completely abandoned, though the building was fenced off for structural safety. A filming permit and a favor from a friend in media got them access for one day. Denise didn't explain the full truth. She just brought an old blueprint of the school, an infrared flashlight, and the bracelet with Maya's name, the one she'd found not long ago, wedged near the old wall. Room 3B was still there, crumbling walls, dusty blackboard, broken chalk scattered on the floor. Denise pointed to the wall separating the two classrooms, the same wall rebuilt in 1994, and asked the crew to place a shotgun mic directly against it. They turned off all the lights, leaving only a dim floor light. Denise stepped forward, placed her hand on the cold bricks, and closed her eyes. No one spoke. The room sank into a thick silence, the kind where you can hear your own heartbeat. Then, the mic picked up something, faint, like a scratch or a breath, struggling to break through. The cameraman thought it was interference, but when they checked, no devices were causing static. Denise asked them to record again. This time, they placed a contact mic directly onto the wall and recorded for 5 minutes. When they played the audio back, it was clear a broken sequence of compressed breathing, like someone trapped behind fabric, trying to scream but making no sound. Denise didn't react. She reached into her bag, pulled out Maya's bracelet, and laid it gently on the center brick. "Film this," she said, as they zoomed in. The camera picked up a thin scratch running across the center brick like it had been scraped with a fingernail or something sharp, and next to it a faded, rusty smear. The cameraman swallowed hard. That looks like dried blood. That footage has never been made public. Denise sent it to a friend with forensic training. A week later, he replied, "I can't pull DNA samples too degraded, but there are signs of biological residue, like someone's body had been pressed against that wall for a long time." The question was no longer what's behind the wall. It was who was ever trapped inside it. Denise remembered Maya's expression in that final photo. Not fear, but confusion, like she knew something was coming, but didn't yet understand why it had to be her. After that recording was analyzed, Denise couldn't wait any longer. She felt that if she didn't act now, the last traces would vanish, just like the records that had once been accidentally lost. She returned to the state archive, this time alone, and requested every personnel oversight report tied to special education programs between 1992 and 1996. After 3 hours of digging, she found one unlabeled document, the title, Barely Legible Internal Behavioral Oversight Report, April 1993. M&T. She opened it, only 3 pages, but every word squeezed her chest. It described experimental setups in high-control educational environments, monitoring how children responded when deprived of time, light, and verbal cues. It outlined techniques for emotional recalibration through extended silence, and referenced cyclical disassociation testing. She flipped to the author's name on page 3, Marcus Trent, OBSR Internal Behavioral Architect. He wasn't just a teacher, he designed the experiment. Denise nearly dropped the file. Internal Behavioral Architect wasn't a teaching title. It was how systems label those who build experiments who don't teach. But manipulate, on the back page, barely visible beneath faded ink. She spotted a handwritten note, almost erased subject MP shows rapid response, high silent retention threshold, strong non-verbal cue absorption, recommendation long-term monitoring, MP, Maya Parker. The world tilted. It was no longer a question. Maya hadn't been randomly taken. She was watched, assessed, selected, and worst of all, it might have been planned from the start. Denise now understood why Maya never came home that day, why her backpack ended up behind a wall, and why for 30 years no one had ever been truly investigated. She visited the last known address of Marcus Trent, a modest apartment in Joliet, about 2 hours from Chicago, but the building manager told her Trent had moved out in 2007. No forwarding address, no one had seen him since, no passport activity, no medical records, no tax history. Marcus Trent, the man at the center of it all, had vanished without a trace. And that, more than anything, terrified Denise, because an ordinary man can be found, but a man who belongs to the system can be erased completely if the system wants him gone. Denise once believed that if she could just find Marcus Trent, all her questions would finally be answered. But when she learned he had disappeared nearly 2 decades ago and that all OBSR records had been pulled from the system, she began to doubt the core of her own search. Was it really just one man pulling the strings, or were there other hands more discreet, more powerful, operating behind the scenes? She returned to where it all began, Maya's former classmates. At first, their stories had felt like emotional clues, but now, Denise came armed with audio recordings, video footage, and legal documents, and she noticed something chilling. Each person, when recounting their memories a second time, changed a small detail. Darnell, who once said Maya's last silence challenge was on a Wednesday, now swore it was Monday. Kia, who said Maya sat in the back right corner of the room, now insisted it was the left. At first, Denise thought it might be human error. But when she checked an old classroom seating chart she'd kept from her mother, Maya's seat had never been on the left. Denise began to feel something fracture inside her. Was someone or something interfering with people's memories? Or was it simply the passage of time that blurred the truth? But if that were the case, why was she the only one who remembered everything so clearly? A disturbing thought crossed her mind. What if Maya wasn't the only target? What if the entire class was the experiment to test this theory? She went back to Dr. Howard McLean. Is it possible? She asked. For multiple people to all misremember the same event in the same way McLean was quiet for a long time. Then he said, yes. If they all underwent the same type of psychological conditioning, the kind that teaches you memory is just a signal something that can be reprogrammed, and in a school setting. If that's reinforced through games, lessons, even light and sound, it's absolutely possible. Denise was stunned. Everything she thought was fact now felt like theory. Every person she trusted as a witness could be an unwitting participant, and the most painful possibility of all, if Maya was still alive. Would she still be Maya, or had she been shaped into something else? The very concept of truth began to blur, not just memory, but the idea of what was real at all, and somewhere in the space between those two extremes, that's where Maya had vanished. Then, one January night in 2023, Denise received an anonymous email. The subject line read only, "You weren't looking for the wrong person, just the wrong time." Attached was a single scanned fax faded, smudged at the margins. It looked exactly like the documents she'd seen in the EMR archives, unsigned. No sender. Just lines of quiet, coded language. The first line read, Trial 1, complete subject group 94-3B exhibits atypical response to isolated psychological stimuli. Recommendation, do not terminate. Initiate passive observation phase. The phrase do not terminate sent a shiver down her spine. She printed the fax and examined every line. In the bottom corner, OBSR MT9402. Marcus Trent, room 3B, 1994. But what froze her was the final line on page 2, almost scratched out, overwritten in messy handwriting, confirmed unexpected presence of subject P2 at secondary observation point, recommendation remove from centralized processing, P2. Until now, Denise had always believed Maya was MP subject P1, then who was P2? She pulled up the original class list for 3B. 15 students. One name she'd always overlooked stood out, Pauline James, a quiet girl with brown skin who transferred schools just after the summer of 1994 and was never heard from again. Denise recalled her mother once saying, Maya told me Pauline always knew who'd be picked for the silence game, like she could read minds. Back then, they chalked it up to childhood stories. Denise tried searching for Pauline. Nothing on Facebook, no LinkedIn. The alumni network came up empty. But when she ran an old yearbook photo through a facial recognition tool, one result appeared. A woman named Lara P. had once spoken at a closed-door conference in Atlanta in 2011 on behavioral governance in controlled educational environments. The face, the eyes, even the posture, all matched Pauline James. Denise couldn't be sure. But if Pauline was subject P2, and if she wasn't lost, but retained, trained, and now employed in education policy, then maybe Maya wasn't the only subject of conversion. Maybe she was the one who failed the experiment. Or worse, the one they chose not to keep. Everything Denise thought she knew was unraveling. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about the system itself, one that only kept those who adapted, and those who didn't disappeared. As the theories mounted, Denise returned to the only thing she could trust, the physical, what she could see, touch, record. She filed for special access to Roosevelt's final restricted zone, the basement archive. once used to store old school materials. Most of the halls had collapsed, mold soaked into the walls. But one red door caught her eye boarded shut, with a faded sign, "Danger, do not enter." According to the original blueprint, this was the entrance to storage room 3A space that no longer existed on any modern school map. Denise pulled the boards loose, inside. The air shifted pressurized, heavy enough to make her ears pop. She swept her flashlight across the room, broken chairs, boxes of crumbling paper, mold-covered uniforms. But in the far corner, next to the west wall, she saw them. A pair of small white shoes, classic style, laced, covered in dust, but creased at the ankles, like they'd been worn often. Denise knelt down. On the back of the left shoe, in faded blue pen, were 3 letters, M.P. Her heart clenched. These were Maya's shoes. She remembered tying them that morning. She remembered Maya begging their mom to let her wear them because today's special. How could they be here if Maya disappeared outside the school? Her shoes should be somewhere else, not behind 3 sealed doors in the basement of the place she vanished from. Beneath the shoes was a crumpled sheet of paper, old wrapping paper. Maybe. Denise unfolded it. It was a copy of a student behavior evaluation form. Name, Parker. M. Date, June 14th, 1994, 2 days before Maya disappeared. Typed note, responds well to low light conditions. Tendency to maintain silence under isolation. Recommend proceeding to next phase. But at the bottom, scrawled in red pen, one handwritten line. Not ready. That phrase, not ready, had appeared once before, on the note hidden inside the wall. A sentence repeated, 2 locations. 30 years apart. Both tied to Maya. Denise stood in the darkness, holding the shoes, and she knew. Maya didn't vanish far. She had been here observed, evaluated, isolated, then hidden away. No one had noticed. No one had heard. Because maybe Maya never left Roosevelt. Maya's shoes, ever since they were found, have sat inside a small glass box on Denise's bookshelf. Silent reminder no one wants to acknowledge. Denise once thought she'd cry when she touched them again. But in that moment, all she felt was emptiness. No tears, no rage, just a quiet fracture stretching across her mind, where every question had once been asked and quietly left unanswered. She brought the evidence to the police. The officer who took her report was young, had never even heard the name Maya Parker. He listened politely, jotted down a few notes, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, this case is beyond the statute of limitations. Without a body or a new witness, we can't reopen the file." Denise wasn't surprised. She simply left a copy of Maya's 1994 behavior evaluation on his desk and said, "Some missing persons cases don't need a body because the real evidence is buried in the system." Then she walked out. No one was prosecuted. No one disciplined. No one ever officially acknowledged that a program called OBSR had existed. The documents Denise found, when cross-checked with federal archives, were all marked as never authorized by any legitimate agency. She asked, "Then who wrote them?" No one could answer. They said it might be fabricated, or perhaps part of an internal file that was destroyed, but when she asked who authorized that destruction, not a single name appeared. In late April, Denise returned to Roosevelt one last time before demolition began to make way for new housing. She stood on the cracked concrete, where the 3B hallway had once been. A light breeze carried dust and the scent of rotting wood. She closed her eyes and imagined Maya's laughter again, the sound of little feet sneaking away to hide storybooks, and those eyes in the final photo. Eyes looking at someone behind the camera. Not Denise, not their mother. Someone else. Someone only Maya knew. She placed her sister's bracelet on the ground, then stood up and walked away with nothing in her hands. To this day, Maya Parker's name doesn't appear on any major missing persons lists. There were no news headlines, no community vigils, no federal records. But Denise knows if she stops now, Maya will disappear a second time, and this time it'll be from memory. A flawed program can be erased. A building can be torn down. But a question left unanswered never truly leaves. Maybe Maya Parker never got to leave that classroom. Maybe she was chosen not because she did something wrong, but because she was too right. And maybe there are things we call education, innovation, or research that were tested on children who had no one to protect them. Maybe no one was overtly cruel, no one waved a knife, but every moment of neglect, every delayed file, every voice that said shall probably come back became a cut. And some cuts don't bleed, they just make people disappear. And maybe, just maybe, Maya never left Roosevelt at all. Maybe she's still there, buried in a memory repressed, a file erased, a corner of a classroom no one speaks of, not to be found, but to be remembered, not to be rescued, but to be told, like a whisper from inside the breathing wall, I'm still here.